Let me ask you about these symptoms. Which of these is the obstacle to asking for what you need? Is it that you struggle to believe your emotions are valid? Do you have a hard time asking for what you need because you worry about how it might make the other person feel? Today we're diving into a topic that many of us can relate to: the challenge of asking for what we need. Have you ever found yourself hesitating or struggling to express your desires, whether it's in your personal relationships, at work, or even in simple day-to-day situations? Well, you're not alone. Asking for what we need can be a complex process influenced by a variety of factors. In this video, we'll explore 6 of the most common reasons why many of us find it difficult to communicate our needs openly and honestly. As we go through them, notice what comes up for you. Are there memories that come to mind? Automatic thoughts? Stories? Pay attention to that as we make our way through. Number 1, invalidation of emotions. If we grew up in a home where our feelings were dismissed or disregarded on a basic level, we learn that our feelings aren't valid. We think we're overreacting or making things up. We can even assume that the emotion is coming from a place inside that doesn't make sense. So, when we have a need, instead of asking for what we want, we assume that what we want is somehow needy or weird or wrong. Emotional invalidation does not have to be super intense, but it can be. It might be as extreme as a parent yelling at their child that their emotions are stupid or way over the top. But also it can play out in ways that we tend to normalize. Like, picture yourself as a child. And now imagine that you're having a really big feeling. Let's start with the feeling of excitement. Maybe you're excited about what you want to be when you grow up. Now let's envision that you run into the room to tell your parents you're so excited. You're going to be an astronaut, or maybe you want to be a singer or president. How do you think your parents would have responded in that moment? Would they lean in and listen to your excitement? Would they meet you in that moment, validating the joy and excitement that comes with dreaming big dreams? Would they ignore you? Like, that's great, honey, and then move on? Or would they feel it's important to let you know that that dream probably won't happen? Do you picture them rolling their eyes like you're silly or acting funny, or telling someone nearby about it like you're being so cute and naive? Now let's imagine a different scenario. Can you picture yourself as a child being sad about something, feeling disappointed? Maybe we didn't get that role in the play we wanted or didn't make the varsity team. Picture going to your parents about it. How do they react? Do they stop what they're doing and sit with you in that feeling, listening and leaning in, taking your feelings seriously? Or do they minimize the thing that you're upset about? Oh, you're just being so silly, or even get frustrated with your tears, like, stop crying. Maybe they even use toxic positivity to try to get you to snap out of it. Like, look on the bright side. You have so many good things going for you. I know it might be hard to see how that kind of moment connects to asking for what we need, but what happens in both of those situations is that we learn our feelings aren't valid. Kids don't have the ability to interpret that as, mom had a rough day, so she's a little bit more impatient. Or dad has a hard time with sadness because of his own issues. Instead, we internalize it as, my feelings must be an overreaction or even a wrong response to whatever it is that happened. Fast forward, and we're in a friendship where our friend has a pattern of making fun of us in public. We hate that. But instead of speaking up, we assume that the problem is with us. Maybe we're being too sensitive. Maybe we're overreacting. Instead of speaking up, we continue to feel hurt in that dynamic. And sometimes it spills out in passive-aggressive comments because we don't know how to address it. Number 2, emotional manipulation. Picture this. You're 14 years old. You've been struggling with anxiety and stress due to school pressure and some drama in your friend group. You come home and vent about how stressed you are. Instead of offering empathy and understanding, your mom responds by becoming emotionally reactive and playing the victim. Like, I can't believe you're putting this all on me. Don't you know how stressed I am? How do you think it feels for me to hear all of this? Emotional manipulation creates a dynamic where children feel responsible for managing their parents' emotions and prioritizing their needs over their own, leading to feelings of guilt, obligation, and emotional confusion. These kinds of interactions create a space where a child begins to internalize the idea that expressing their needs or feelings is hurtful, and that they're fully responsible for how someone responds to their expression of emotion. And just a quick check-in, is your fear of asking for what you need fueled by your concerns about how it could make someone else feel? That you might be hurting their feelings or adding to their stress? Those worries can keep us from asking for what we need, and as a result, our attempts to get our needs met might come out kind of sideways. We might find ourselves trying to get our needs met without having to communicate our feelings, sort of like the silent screaming that I talked about in my other video. Number 3, lack of emotional availability. Anyone have caregivers that were emotionally unavailable or preoccupied with their own needs? Maybe you had a parent who had a chronic illness, and that meant that they were unable for some reason to provide attention or affection consistently. Perhaps you had a parent who had their own trauma or childhood attachment wounds that made them able to provide for you physically or logistically, but not emotionally. Or it's possible that your parents just avoided any kind of personal or sensitive topic because it was just too much for them, which could have also meant that you had to provide your parents with emotional support as well. The hard thing about being a kid is that whether our parents were unwilling or unable for some legitimate reason to provide emotional availability for us, our brain still internalizes the experience the same way. We assume that our emotions or our needs are too much, or that it's not okay to express them. In fact, we might not even know how to. Our brain might not even think of sharing emotional needs as an option because it's never been one. In that process, we may have learned to prioritize meeting our own needs, like ourself, doing it all ourselves, and suppressing emotions to avoid relying on anyone else for support. We may have developed a pattern of self-reliance and independence, or what I like to call toxic independence, where we don't think we can count on anyone else, so we have to do everything on our own. Were your caregivers emotionally unavailable in some way? If you're not sure, here's what that may have looked like. Imagine Sarah, who lost her father at a young age. Her mother had a hard time coping with the loss. She loved Sarah, but didn't have the capacity to provide consistent emotional support to her or her siblings for a period of their childhood. As a result of this upbringing, Sarah took on additional responsibilities around the house and in caring for her younger siblings. She took on the role of caretaker for her mom and her siblings. She was parentified, or as I recently talked about, she had eldest daughter syndrome, and ended up caring for her mom more than her mom ended up caring for her. Sarah, now in her late 20s, finds herself in a romantic relationship with John, a caring and supportive partner. However, Sarah's upbringing of emotional unavailability has left her with deeply ingrained patterns of self-sufficiency and difficulty expressing vulnerability. Sarah is feeling overwhelmed with work and personal stressors, but she doesn't even think to communicate her struggles to John. Instead, she becomes increasingly frustrated and bitter that he expects her to do everything, almost resenting the role that she put herself in. It can be frustrating and painful, not to mention difficult, for those we are in relationships with to even understand, frankly, because we didn't give them an opportunity to. Number 4, misattunement. Childhood misattunement refers to a lack of emotional attunement or responsiveness from caregivers during a child's formative years. It occurs when caregivers fail to accurately recognize, understand, and appropriately respond to the child's emotional needs and cues. Attunement is not just about emotional validation or availability. It's also a huge key in emotional identification. We learn how to identify our emotions through this process of attunement. Like, think of a newborn baby. They feel panic or pain, but they don't know whether they're hungry, thirsty, sick, or tired. A parent figures that out by attuning to their cries and then helps them learn to identify that feeling, right? They come in, they swoop in, they help, and they fix it. When we grow up in a house with emotional lack of attunement, our parents don't notice our internal states, or misattunement, like they misidentify our internal states, we can struggle as adults to identify and articulate our own needs. We may have become disconnected from our inner experiences and uncertain about what we truly want or need. Consider this. During challenging times, you might sense that a relationship isn't functioning as it should. Taking a proactive approach, ask yourself, when reflecting on your relationships, do you have a clear understanding of your needs? Can you identify what you desire within that dynamic? Let's go even deeper. Do you know what you want in life? Do you know what you want to be like or do? Our emotions are the ways we get in touch with our preferences and wants. When we didn't have healthy attunement from our parents, we may not have learned how to identify them. And if we don't know what we need, it's really hard to ask for it, right? Let's think about you for a second. Now, picture yourself as a child. You may not remember much about your childhood, so just imagine this. Imagine you go to your parents and you're feeling anxious or afraid of something that they've asked you to do. Is it possible they might misinterpret that behavior, thinking that maybe you're being defiant or disobedient? Is there a time you can imagine that you might have gone to them for comfort and instead received punishment? This kind of misattunement can feel so scary that we often disconnect from our emotional experiences altogether, thinking that they're dangerous or bad. We felt sad and we got in trouble, so sad must be bad. We felt confused or afraid, we got yelled at, so confused or afraid must be shameful. If you identify with any of that, you might find that as an adult, you struggle to identify and articulate your own needs. You may have disconnected from your needs in order to protect yourself from being, bad. Or you might just feel a sense of shame around the thought of bringing emotions like that to someone else. Does any of that ring true for you? Do you identify with that? Number 5, poor communication patterns. Witnessing unhealthy communication patterns such as conflict avoidance, passive aggressiveness, or a sense of obligation within our family can shape our communication style and make it difficult to express our needs directly. What do I mean by that? Well, think about a home where your parents are always polite to each other or friends, but then they also vented about other people around you. You might have learned that expressing needs to the other person in a relationship is rude or thought of as unkind. And you can feel frustrated, but you can't express that to them directly or you're being rude. Let me give you an example. Let's say your neighbor comes over to ask your parents to watch her dog while she goes on vacation. Your mom says yes and smiles and even offers your neighbor some coffee and a snack. When the neighbor leaves, your mom's like, ugh, why did she stay so long? I can never get rid of her. And it's a little rude of them to ask me to watch their dog, don't you think? As a kid, you watch all of this unfold. From our parents, we learn how the world works. So your little child brain doesn't think, weird that my mom invited them in and then didn't want them to stay, and weird of them to say yes if they wanted to say no. We don't think like that. Instead, our brain learns this is how the world works. It must be rude to ask someone to do that because my mom said it's rude. And also, it must be rude to ask someone to leave when you want them to because otherwise my mom would have done that. Through this one example, you've learned that number 1, it's rude to ask for help. And number 2, it's rude to express your own preferences. In fact, it's actually your job to anticipate the other person's preferences and cater to them. Do you relate to that at all? Do you find yourself irritated when people ask you to do something because you feel like the ask itself is a request, one you can't say no to? Do you find yourself frustrated when people don't anticipate your needs, like when they don't pick up on your indirect signals? For example, you're out with friends and you keep sighing, but no one asks you what's wrong. Or you're complaining about not having a ride to the airport and no one jumps in and offers to take you. That might be because if the situation was reversed, you would absolutely offer or lean in, because in your mind, that's how the world works. No one asks for what they need because that's rude, and everyone anticipates what the other person needs because that's how you get your needs met. Number 6, conditional love. Last but not least, let's talk about dynamics in a family where there is conditional love. Family environments where love and approval are contingent upon meeting certain expectations or behaviors can create a fear of rejection or abandonment. We may resort to indirect communication to avoid risking disapproval or withdrawal of affection. Let's think of an example. Emily grows up in a family where her parents have strict expectations for behavior and achievement. They only show affection and approval when Emily meets these expectations, such as getting good grades or following their rules. However, when Emily expresses her own needs or desires that don't align with their expectations, her parents react by withdrawing their affection. As an adult, Emily struggles to assert her needs or desires openly, fearing rejection or abandonment if they don't align with someone else's expectations. She may even hesitate to ask for what she needs directly, preferring to suppress her desires to avoid conflict or potential disapproval. So, a question for those of you who struggle to ask for what you need. Which one of these dynamics do you identify with most? You may not even know, but let me ask you about these symptoms. Which of these is the obstacle to asking for what you need? Is it that you struggle to believe your emotions are valid? Do you think they might be foolish or silly, or an overreaction that may indicate you grew up in a home without healthy emotional validation? Do you have a hard time asking for what you need because you worry about how it might make the other person feel? You may have grown up around emotional manipulation, where you took on too much responsibility for other people's emotions. Maybe you struggle because you feel you should be able to handle things on your own. This might indicate you grew up in a home without emotional availability. Do you feel unable to even identify or articulate what you need? That could mean that you grew up without attunement. Or is the thing that's in the way just this sense that it's inappropriate or rude? That can be an indicator that you grew up with a family culture that had poor direct communication patterns. Lastly, is the thing that's in the way a fear of rejection or abandonment? Maybe you experienced conditional love or approval as a kid. So what do? Addressing these underlying factors often requires introspection, that being a detective about it. Also therapy and a conscious effort to develop healthier communication patterns and coping strategies. By acknowledging and understanding the impact of family of origin experiences, we can work towards breaking free from patterns like this and foster more authentic and fulfilling relationships. If you want to know more about that, you can check out my workshops at katiemorton.com. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and I will see you next time.